We hear the word sustainability so often, but if you look at the world today, do you think we truly understand what it means? In 1987, the United Nations Brundtland Commission defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. One thing I really like about this definition is that the Commission used the word needs, not luxuries and definitely not greed. While many people think that sustainability is only about protecting the environment, it is actually a much more holistic concept. It is surely about how we treat our planet, but it's also about our economies, how we treat each other, and ultimately how we treat ourselves. This holistic approach is captured in what we call the 3 pillars of sustainability: environmental, social, and economic. Let's start with the environmental pillar because usually that's the first thing people associate with sustainability. This pillar focuses on the preservation and health of Gaia's ecosystems and resources. Therefore, some of the key aspects to sustain it include climate action and climate policy, soil preservation, waste management, and water protection. When we use resources, we need to replenish them, respecting the rate at which the earth can replace them. For example, when we cut trees, we need to plant new trees and give them enough time to grow before we cut them. Or when we catch fish, we need to do so at a rate that gives them enough time to reproduce. Because if we use our resources too quickly, we might run out of them. The environmental pillar also acknowledges that the health of the planet is deeply connected with our own health. For example, through the quality of the air that we breathe or of the water that we drink. But sustainability isn't just about nature. It's also about our relationships to others and to ourselves. Which brings us to the social pillar. This pillar focuses on the well-being of people and communities. It is about prioritizing inclusion, equity, human rights, social justice, and community development. In a socially sustainable society, everyone has fair access to essential resources and opportunities. This includes quality education, work possibilities, safety, food, water, and healthcare. Therefore, more people can participate in the economy, unlock economic potential, which brings us to the economic pillar of sustainability. This pillar focuses on managing financial and material resources to ensure long-term economic stability and resilience. In other words, in an economically sustainable society, everyone earns enough money to meet their own needs and support their businesses without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Some key aspects here are, for example, resource conservation, so that business don't run out of resources in the long term. Circular economy, which involves creating products that can be repaired, reused, and recycled, which helps to reduce waste and preserve resources. Investing in sustainable infrastructure and creating new jobs in sectors like renewable energy and regenerative agriculture. Now, you might have intuitively thought that the 3 pillars influence one another. And if you have, that's true, because the 3 pillars are interconnected. For a system to be fully sustainable, the 3 pillars need to work together. If one of them is out of balance, it will contribute to destabilize the other pillars as well, a little bit like in a domino effect, and the system will not be sustainable anymore. To understand better the impact that these pillars have on one another, let's take a concrete example and have a look at what happened during the coffee crisis, which took place in the early 2000s. It happened as a consequence of destabilizing the economic pillar. It used to be sustained by something called the International Coffee Agreement, or ICA. The ICA's function was to stabilize coffee prices. It did so by controlling how much coffee a country can produce or export, that is, also by controlling supply and demand. But in 1989, when the ICA ended, coffee prices went down, putting pressure on farmers to produce more coffee to compensate for the lower prices. This was especially the case for small farmers. In places like Vietnam, farmers were forced to cut down trees so they could produce more coffee, causing deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and even more emissions. Meanwhile, in other regions, the lower prices forced farmers to adopt unsustainable practices so they could increase productivity in the short term. For example, monoculture farming and heavy use of pesticides, both of which strip away the soil of its nutrients over time. So these consequences destabilize the environmental pillar, causing degradation of the soil and water reservoirs. Not only that, but the heavy use of pesticides also brought health issues to the farming communities. As if this was not bad enough, increasing coffee production caused oversupply. In 1997, coffee supply surpassed coffee demand, which caused the prices to sink even further. At one point, coffee prices got so low that they were not even able to cover production costs. In this time, a lot of farmers got broke, especially small farmers. Some of them lost their farms, so they were forced to move to the city to look for new jobs. And if you think about it, for farmers that left their land and lost their farms, with them was also lost a lot of knowledge of how to plant and cultivate coffee. So this was also lost in that process. Altogether, and this is an assumption of mine, the economic pressure might have caused child labor. This happens often when families don't have enough income to send their children to school. So they end up forcing their children to work so they can make enough money to make a living. I don't need to tell you that's not socially sustainable. That's awful, and child labor should be avoided at all costs. Yeah, I feel quite moved when I say this. Going back to the story, I don't mean to say that coffee production was sustainable before the coffee crisis, but understanding how this crisis took place is a great way to understand how the three pillars are interconnected and how they influence one another. Also that when one is destabilized, it will also create a domino effect, destabilizing the other pillars further. It also shows the importance of regulations to achieve sustainability and highlights the consequences of not being sustainable. For coffee production to be sustainable, it will need to look somewhat like this. The environmental pillar would focus on organic and regenerative agriculture, also on sustainable water management, as these practices, they help to preserve the health of the soil, they reduce water consumption, and protect water reservoirs. Meanwhile, one way through which farmers could strengthen the economic pillar would be by planting different crops together, so they could have more than one source of income. This way, they would not only be less dependent on coffee alone, but they could also combine plants that increase coffee productivity. For example, since coffee plants really like shade, they could plant it with banana plants that create shade that support the growth of the coffee plants. Another strategy would be to support fair trade models. In fair trade models, farmers get a minimum guaranteed price for the coffee or for whatever they produce, which stabilizes their income. In fair trade, child labor and other exploitative working conditions are prohibited, which is a great win for the social pillar of sustainability. These measures would improve the financial conditions of the farming families, which would possibly and more likely enable them to invest in the education of their children. As you can see, sustainability is a highly complex topic. And even though we speak about it so often, we still have so much to learn about it. I'm myself included, as I learned so much already to create this video, for example. what is really important to understand sustainability is to look at the supply chain of a product as a whole. So we need to ask ourselves which resources are needed to create this product, how are these resources extracted, how much of these resources do we have? Do we have enough of them? Can we replenish them? What are the working conditions of the people involved in its production? And then it's also really important to ask what happens to the product once it's reaching its end of life. Can it be repaired? Can it be reused? Can it be recycled? Can it be upcycled? We humans have this thing in which we lose track so easily of the consequences of our actions, which gives us the impression that we're not creating an impact with our lives. But we are. And it's so important for our personal growth and our collective growth that we take responsibility for the impact that we generate. There is this African proverb that I find really wise and that really touches me. It says, "We do not inherit the land from our ancestors. We borrow it from our grandchildren." So the question is, what kind of ancestor do you want to be?